All right. Welcome to the very last talk at Derbycon. Appreciate you all coming out, sticking around. So we originally put this discussion together in 50-minute fashion, and we volunteered to cut it down to 25 in order to help some scheduling things around. So we're going to jump right in and get started, I think. I'm Jason Morrow. I have responsibility for the Security Operations Center at Walmart. That includes real-time threat detection, active defense, automation orchestration, as well as the responsibilities that Sara has. You can catch me on Twitter at jrmorrow43.
Hi, my name is Sara Leal. I'm one of the senior managers in the Security Operations Center. I have responsibility for the SIEM engineering team and the SOC data analytics team. I'm also responsible for helping lead the effort where we implemented an internal MSP in our mergers and acquisitions here at Walmart for our internal customers. So before we get too far, let me give you our disclaimer. The following views and opinions and statements are our own and may or may not be that of our employer. So you've probably seen our Walmart booth. If you haven't, you totally missed it. It's like a 25,000-foot banner stuck on the second floor. But one of the two questions that we get often is, who are you and what are you guys doing here? So let's talk a little bit about who we are real quick, and then we'll get into the meat of our discussion. So Walmart has approximately about 265 million customers across our 11,000 stores each week. And in that, we have about 2.2 million associates that work for us. We are under 55 different banners in 27 different countries, and we also are mini e-commerce sites. So we're not just your friendly neighborhood market or supercenter that you pass on your way home, but we also have a very large InfoSec presence of about 600 folks with the same vision and goal in mind, is to protect not only the Walmart name, but also to protect our customers and their information. So why are we here? There's several reasons why we're here, but one of them is we want to share some of the wins and some of the opportunities we've had, especially when it comes to integrating mergers and acquisitions from an InfoSec perspective. So back in 2016, Walmart made the big announcement that we were going to be bringing on Jet.com. And although that made some headlines for us, it wasn't really big news. From an InfoSec perspective, we've dealt with mergers and acquisitions before. So previously in 2014, we had about 13 mergers and acquisitions that were being monitored by a third party. So after doing a little bit of financial calculations and also from looking at it from the type of services that we provide, we determined that it would be a lot easier for us to just go ahead and migrate those services over and us do the threat detection and the monitoring in-house. Learned a lot of lessons, which we're going to share with you today. And one of the reasons why we're sharing is because of some of the compromises that happen in breaches. So believe it or not, 11% of breaches that often occur through an acquisition. And for us, that was just 11% too many. So being Fortune 1 retailer is nice, but being one of the most trusted retailers is even more important, not just for our brand, but it's for our people that we serve each and every day. So where do we get started? When it comes to mergers and acquisitions, the whole process can be somewhat complicated. But the first step is just ensuring that the network you're getting ready to integrate is not already compromised. That'd be pretty nasty if it was. So back in 2017, there was a report given out that stated that the dwell time for malicious attacks was 229 days. Now that's gone down a little bit in the year 2018, but still that's pretty high. And so if you can imagine bringing an integrated network that's already been compromised into yours jeopardizes with customers from both sides. So we can't forget what happened between Verizon and Yahoo. They were in flight with that merger and acquisition process, and Yahoo, it was detected during that time frame that they were under 2 major cyber attacks. Now all that benefited Verizon a little bit because they got a nice little $350 million discount with that. It could have positioned Verizon in a bad way. So that's something that we definitely want to avoid. So the rule of thumb here is a clean network is a happy network. All right, so I'm going to digress for just a moment and just say that I'm a huge wrestling fan, and I'm not afraid to admit that. And there can be a lot of comparisons between the world of wrestling and the merger and acquisition process. So case in point, this past year, in March, I believe, was dubbed one of the most epic Royal Rumbles in the history of World Wrestling, and Titus O'Neil finally got invited to participate in the Royal Rumble, and he, kind of missed the ring. He tripped, fell, and slid right underneath it. And that was dubbed one of the most epic failures of an entrance for the world of wrestling. So when it comes to wrestling, you can't let failure be your finishing move. And there's a very specific reason why I'm talking about this. So in the year 2017, the industry saw the most mergers and acquisitions ever in a single calendar year of over about 50,000. In 2018, we're already up by 61%, with a $2.5 trillion already spent. Walmart was part of that $2.5 trillion with the acquisition of Flipkart, if you haven't heard about that in the news. So what's so important about that is the failure rate. So depending on who you cite or what source you go to, there's between a 70 and 90% failure rate for all mergers and acquisitions. Oh, for Walmart, that's pretty big. We don't want that to happen here. So I immediately began to research, like, what the heck happened? How do you have such a high failure rate? And the biggest thing is the culture differences. So let's look at that for just a second. Understanding the culture of the acquisition that you're integrating is probably one of the most important key things when it comes to the acquisition process. You can't forget the human factor. At the end of the day, it's not about the dollar. It's about the people that work there and the talent that they represent. So a lot of the smaller companies or even startup companies, the folks that work there enjoy the atmosphere. It's relaxed. They have more creativity. They're kind of forced to wear multiple hats. So you have one person that's your IT guy, your security guy, your endpoint guy, who does a little bit of everything. And so with that, you get a pretty diverse skill set. And they're very proud of the culture that they have. And that can't be ignored. Probably one of the worst mistakes a company can make when they walk into an acquisition is assuming that because we own you, you have to do what we say. That's not the case. If you act that way and come in with that attitude, you'll have a massive turnover rate and you'll lose a lot of really great talent. So the important thing is to understand the difference, but also develop a plan where you integrate both cultures while keeping both cultures intact. So one of the things that we learned when we walk into an acquisition, we'd sit down with them and explain, okay, hey, we're InfoSec, we're here to protect your network. They're like, yeah, right. You're more interested about the websites I'm going to, my instant messaging, and you're totally reading my emails. I'll be honest, I like a good story just as much as the next guy, but when it comes to protecting the network, we simply don't have time to find out who's doing what. And yes, we will block some websites that are known for malicious activity, but really, it's all about protecting the network. So one last piece of this for me is the communication process. You gotta know who you're talking to. And in a lot of cases, that doesn't happen. So you have to not only understand your culture and to make sure that you're providing good processes here and there, but also that communication plan between you and the company that you're acquiring is critical. They need to know who to reach out to when it's time to hit the panic button. If they see something going on in security, they need to know who to talk to. So having your points of contact documented as well as this very strong escalation path is critical. And going hand in hand with that is building relationships. I mentioned the human factor prior. I can't stress that enough. People are so important in this industry, especially when it comes to cybersecurity. Cybersecurity professionals are birds of a different feather. We eat, drink, and breathe this stuff. We have red teamers that drop 0-day exploits on the weekend, and blue teamers are sniffing their networks because that's just what they do. So we can't forget just who we're dealing with, too. And then also on top of that is having a physical presence. So in our acquisitions, recently we got back from a week-long trip outside the country at an acquisition we've had for quite some time. And we were able to accomplish more in just 1 week than what we were able to do in 3 to 4 years. So having an on-site presence is absolutely critical and imperative in this whole entire process. And then, of course, you have establishing reoccurring meetings. So to make sure you continue to keep that momentum going, having reoccurring meetings with your acquisitions, the folks, the talent there, whether it looks like a daily scrum meeting, I hate that word, or biweekly meetings or even town halls, it's important to keep that connection. And last and most importantly, you have to give more than you take. As a larger company coming in and acquiring a smaller company, you have a lot of benefits that some of the smaller companies don't have, such as all you can eat or enterprise licensing. So sharing that with the acquisitions that you bring on board is very helpful, as well as providing the same training and education that you give to your own folks. Making sure you expand that out to your acquisitions is also important. It ensures consistency in technology and also shows that you're really invested in them and the talent that works there. So the whole entire communication process has to be continually refined. You're going to have people that leave the company or move to different teams. You're going to have to continue to build relationships. Don't ever think that that's something that's no longer an issue since you already did that once. You got to keep that going. And then the next part of that is understanding the different technology stacks or just technologies in themselves with each acquisition.
Right on. Yeah, so recently we've come across kind of a similar footprint in most of our acquisitions. We're usually a startup company, maybe transitioning to like a medium size, gaining some momentum and maturation of their security stack and their technologies. But overall, we've kind of classified it in two separate networks, right? We've got your corporate network, which we refer to as their office, where everyone comes in to work every day. Then what we refer to as their prod network, and that's where they got like all the IP, right? Like the reason we required them, whether that's an e-com site or they're doing some kind of, sweet shipping like algorithms or, whatever it is that they got baked out in their production site where they make all their changes. But one thing that's common is that, these companies aren't very old. So an older company probably invested in, having some infrastructure on site, in a data center, trying to mature that. But they all started out in the cloud. And, as a traditional InfoSec person, sometimes you're not excited to tackle cloud, right? But they do offer some benefits. I mean, they can move fast, right? You can spin up cycles, spin up, processes really, really quickly. It scales really well. It does have some inherent patching. If they were going to do the architecture themselves in a data center, may have some more opportunities than you do it just going straight to the cloud. So it offers some benefit. But at the end of the day, we all hate the cloud because you're just storing it on someone else's computer, right? So hate the cloud. Taking a little closer look at the corporate office footprint. Again, usually it's like 5 offices or less, locations. Everyone there is super smart and super tech savvy. I mean, that's why they're required, right? So everyone's knows their stuff and relies on their own business processes and are somewhat resistant to change, and rightfully so. They have an even smaller InfoSec staff, so they don't subscribe to layered defense all the time. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The word that you hear a lot is user experience. You can't change the user experience. We kind of flip that around, and we want to make sure that we don't help the adversary experience right at the same time. So even though things may have to move fast, we get that, but we want to make sure that we have the right telemetry in order to identify certain threats. So they don't really focus on detective controls or have any when we first walk in, and no one's really taking a look at the logs. Moving over to the prod environment, again, all hosted out in the cloud. Which is, you can tackle that, right? The cloud companies are getting better at offering certain security controls inherently. However, one thing that doesn't sell cloud infrastructure is security logging into a SIEM. That process is still painstakingly hard, and there's a lot of custom development that has to go into it. So when you have your own company and you're working on one vendor in order to get that straightened out, to give you the telemetry and visibility that you need to what's happening on the network, that's hard. When you acquire, 10 companies and they're using 8 different cloud vendors, then that's terrible. And working through that can present a lot of challenges. There's a lot of ways that you can work through those things, and we're happy to talk about that after the conference. But in the essence of time here, we're going to move ahead. So what you want to do is, when you start talking to them, because you really don't have a great idea of maybe what all the intricacies and controls and layers that they have in place on their networks. So you want to, maybe take a look at their standards and policies, or you take a look at, some cloud services or license agreements that they have, or want to ask questions about their tech breakout. However, what you typically see is they don't have any of that stuff. They're trying to move fast, right? And rightfully so. They want to beat their competitors to market, and in order to do that, some of the things that are skilled based in operations just don't come to fruition. So kind of what we did was, this is out on my GitHub page, and it's super technical. It's like a spreadsheet. No macros enabled. I promise. So what we did was we sent just a simple product type sheet to them and said, hey, help me understand if you have any of these products deployed in your environment, because we'd love to collect logs from them into the SOC, right? It's typical products that a SOC would want to ingest in order to improve detection rates on networks. And we got 0 responses, and we couldn't really understand why. And I think it's because we work in InfoSec every day, right? So we have like a lens on that just has an inherent understanding of why these things are important and, what technologies or what vendor examples would go with a product type. So after a while, I went ahead and added the right side to this list and said, okay, I'm looking for, these specific tools if you have those. So then response dropped up or ramped up dramatically. People could connect the dots. Oh yeah, I've got that. I didn't realize that that's what that was. And so to Sarah's point, really driving home that communication makes things a lot easier. So you walk out of there with like an initial list. You can get started in ingesting logs into your SOC. But you have to remember the rules of engagement. There's no magic here. There's no magician in the background making everything happen. You have to give more than you can take. So if, in a particular example, a customer on their risk register was very high to monitor outbound SQL injection from their internal network, I try to wrap my head around that and understand it. But you know what? I had the capability to provide that telemetry back to them, and when that occurred, so we didn't ask questions, we just moved forward putting it in place. And once you work with them and give them a little bit of things that are concerning to them, you get a lot more traction in the long run. You got to have that give attitude. So we have a lot of work to do. We have a list of technologies. We got to get them all integrated. A lot of times you'll find that they don't have the controls in place that you would recommend for an enterprise type network. So we need to cover a lot of ground with a small lift. If there's just a way we could do that, that would be very advantageous. What is something that we could leverage? Now I love the cloud, right? Because now you can go through there and say, hey, we can do like a cloud-based proxy, you can DLP, CASB solutions. You can put something in place that all their traffic, ingress and egress, has to pass through and give you some kind of visibility, especially if you could use your enterprise tools like a cloud-based email filter, something that you may already have deployed. You can reroute their email through there. All of your custom rules are already in place. Puts you way ahead of the game with just a little bit of work up front. However, if you walk into a spot where, if you find yourself in a position where you don't have those enterprise licenses in place, there's still a lot you can do with just a little bit of resource work and not a lot of money. So this is a really long list, and I'd love to talk about all of them, but we're going to focus in on just a few. So if you saw any of the other Walmart talks or any talk in general here this year, or any year, disabling macros is a huge security control that you can implement with little cost as a group policy. Highly recommend disabling macros in your environment. If you have business process that relies on macro-enabled documents, then to Adam Gold's point in his presentation, maybe you can write some YARA rules to detect when a malicious document comes inbound to your network that's macro-enabled. So don't introduce new macro-enabled documents into your network. I highlighted AV, and that's probably going to get a lot of questions. But, AV companies it still detects the commodity stuff and gets it off your plate. Still has value in the layered defense strategy. I would rather know when something happened 2 weeks ago, because our detections are usually 2 to 3 weeks behind, right? So I would rather know something happened 3 weeks ago than not knowing it happened at all. So healthy AV environment, sending those logs into your SIEM is really key for success. Don't default route to the internet. Hard to do in a mature network. You can't implement that because of reasons, lots of them. But if you have that small footprint, like a corporate office where your users are, you still have that flexibility to create change and drive change. Force internet traffic through an authenticated proxy. Do not let all your servers and all your infrastructure just default route out to the internet. Forward that stuff over to a bit bucket, collect it, and hand that over to your enterprise hunt team, because they will find a lot of bad stuff. There's still a ton of stuff that's not proxy enabled. It's an awesome control. It doesn't cost a lot of money. Perimeter change detection. That's it can be pretty obvious sometimes, right? If you have a new server that gets stood up in your DMZ that's requesting or sending new SSH connections, something bad probably happened. You might want to follow up on that and make sure your infrastructure teams have a change record for that. Moving down, block unverified or uncategorized sites. So if you have a proxy out deployed in a network and you're forcing them through that cloud proxy or through a local proxy, a great control is the uncategorized or unverified networks. There's multiple categories of sites that, whether that's banking or government, so on and so forth, that proxy vendors will supply you. When a new domain gets stood up, whether it's high entropy or not, it will go into that unverified category until someone manually verifies it or enough traffic happens on the internet to auto-categorize it. Unfortunately, attackers are lazy sometimes, so they will spin up a new C2 server and immediately try to start directing traffic to it. If the malware is smart enough to forward out through your proxies, that's another great control. We've seen it work time and time again. Obviously, you want to leverage least privilege access. You don't want to make it easy for, if a machine gets compromised or an account gets compromised, to traverse and have access to multiple things on the network. You want to force them to compromise multiple accounts. Enforce password complexity. Don't allow your users to have like summer 2019. I mean, all of this stuff is common sense security, right? But so many people miss it getting it implemented. Password spray attacks are quite often leveraged, and you don't want to make it easy for your adversary. Obviously, if you can't enforce two-factor authentication on your perimeter, which we also highly recommend. So now you've got some logs coming in to your SOC. What do you do next? You have to focus on continuous improvement. Continue to revisit that tech spreadsheet. Get the next batch of logs. Get more telemetry for your SOC. How can you expand your services from your SOC into your incident response and hunt teams? Maybe it's as simple as getting a VPN account or creating a jump box for them to get into the network to respond to. Spin up some sweet reports for their executives so you continue to get that buy-in. And if all else fails, call some people in this room, your friendly neighborhood Walmart red team, or your red team, and leverage your offense for defense. If you suspect that they may be susceptible to a certain type of attack, share that with your offensive friends and counterparts. See if they can compromise or exploit some vulnerabilities that you think may be there. And comparably, once you get your controls in place, call them again and validate that you are looking at the right things and stopping the majority of the attacks coming in. From an integration standpoint, this could be probably like a 2-hour talk all and on its own. So we cut a lot of this stuff out in order to meet the time limit. But when you start talking about hooking networks together and routing certain things, there's a lot of things that need to be considered. Kind of cutting to the point. Don't make those decisions on your own. Involve both the customer and your leadership, and ensure you get risk acceptance where it's appropriate. Sort of tying all this together, as to Sarah's point, understand the cultural differences. You don't want to run in there like a bull in a china shop and fall on your face and, completely kill the operation before it gets started. Have a great communication plan with your partners. Give more than you take. See if you can leverage some cloud services, some common sense security that are free controls or otherwise in order to help protect your counterparts faster. Then focus on rinsing and repeating and doing that often. So if there's anyone left here at Derbycon, we are the last members to present. So do you have any questions? Yes, sir. Great question. And we do have certain members of InfoSec that have signed NDAs that are read into that process and are part of the due diligence plan. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In what stage? Like the leadership team and from InfoSec, or the folks that have signed the NDA, they are involved before, like right on the front end. Like they will know when there is a consideration of purchase. Yeah, so the question was, do we use some of the information on the initial due diligence for negotiation? I don't have visibility into that particularly myself, but from a business, common sense perspective, I am sure that is leveraged in the negotiation. Yes, sir. Yes. How long did you do acquisition for? Can you tell me about acquisition for outside of this? How long would you Yeah, great question. Like every IT answer, it depends, right? It depends on their maturity, what common tool sets they have, or we can leverage our enterprise licenses. So sometimes we have 2 separate security operations centers at Walmart. We have our integrated network And then we have our MSP service that we provide to a lot of these acquisitions. And depending on the state of their maturity and where they're at on the integration plan, they will stay in that MSP until we can get them over into the integrated SOC. Yeah. So unfortunately, like every IT answer, it depends. Yes, sir. The guy next to you can probably answer that. Sorry. No, that's the great part about these acquisitions. We get a tremendous amount of talent, and Alex Flores is here today, and he started on the Jet security team, and now he's come over to the Walmart team, and he's on the Red team. So it's great for us because folks that maybe want to polish or concentrate in one particular area of InfoSec, since Walmart has 600 in InfoSec, they have that opportunity given to them. So there is no threat there. We want to make sure that we're all a big happy family. Yes, sir. Yeah, exactly. Good question. That falls in another group. We actually have a group in our InfoSec department that is dedicated to answering those questions, and that's outside the monitoring and response group. But yes, they have a risk register that they leverage. They contact what we refer to as capability owners. So if we have when you look at InfoSec, whatever standard you subscribe to, right? There's things that you do as a typical part of InfoSec. They interview them, they go in there, they determine what the maturity level is and see how we can leverage, how we can help them continue to mature in the right spots. Yeah, so there's an InfoSec M&A team that integrates and aligns with a larger technology integration team. Cool. Yes, sir. No, I think that group does a great job of reaching out and getting feedback from not only the blue team, but the red teams as well. Yeah, and we certainly have influence prioritizing where certain controls get improved. Absolutely. Yep. Good question. All right, well, with that, we've got some drones in the back. If you all are interested in getting a Walmart drone, we're going to hand those out after the talk. So, all right, thank you all.